Pressure reveals things. Maybe not immediately, sometimes not even loudly, but over time, it exposes a structure underneath you. You see, life doesn't get lighter as you grow. It gets heavier. Titles increase, responsibilities increase, expectations increase, and eventually, the question stops being about capacity. It becomes simpler than that. Are you steady? I'm Cornelius Gamble. This is Pressure and Stability. I examine what pressure exposes, where instability begins, and how to build an internal structure that holds when things intensify. This podcast is for people who understand that as pressure increases, stability must increase with it, or instability begins to dictate the outcomes. Let's jump into today's episode. Today's episode, we are talking about the Tylenol poisoning crisis that took place in 1982. And I wanted to talk about this case study specifically because I feel like this is maybe an extreme situation, but nonetheless a real situation that has occurred that really shows us how we can respond effectively under pressure. It really shows us the depth of having systems and values and principles in place that we can lean on when these situations arise. Now, maybe your situation in your company may look a little bit different from a poisoning crisis, such as what Tylenol went through. Hopefully your situation is nothing like this, but pressure is pressure. And one thing that we can all understand is that pressure isn't going anywhere. Yes, it may ebb and flow. It may increase, it may decrease, but nonetheless, pressure is not going anywhere. And so let me set the scene for you really quick when it comes to this Tylenol poisoning crisis from 1982. There were 7 people who died, 7 deaths due to cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules in Chicago. 7 deaths. And as we know, there's no amount of money that can replace human life. As we know, there's no amount of apologies that can bring back a lost loved one. We understand this. So as we set the stage on this, we start to open the door, realizing that this has heavy weight associated to it. You see, the product represented a major share of the company revenue. I'm talking Tylenol. So now we start to see how things start to contract. 7 deaths. This is one of your largest production vehicles for revenue in your company. And then on top of that, media gets a hold of this. Of course, when media gets a hold of it, they start uncovering the things that are already out there, but publicizing it not only to that region, but to the entire United States, if not the world. See, media coverage escalated rapidly. And of course, we know once one news media outlet gets a hold of it and it's a good story, other news media outlets are going to want to get access to it. They're going to go out, start doing their research. They're going to start uncovering other things. And it's like a race to see who can get the story told first, right? Of course, with media, a lot of times we have to be very intentional on what we allow in and do our own research, because sometimes there's a level of propaganda, right, that we have to be able to decipher through. But in this case, the public fear spread nationwide. I mean, you're looking at how many people are taking Tylenol. And see, there was no proof that the initial tampering happened inside of the company. Now, things started to get interesting, right? The pressure was existential. Major financial issues that were being faced, major legal issues that were being faced at this time. Their reputation was on the line. The moral compass was being challenged, right? But now here's a decision point. And this is what they could have done. This is what Johnson Johnson could have done. They could have only recalled the affected region. Why would that have been something that they would have done? Well, if you only recall the affected region, now you are making sure that you were looking out for your revenue. This is the area that you know it's in already. And so it keeps you from being maybe reactionary. You keep your product out on the marketplace. You fix the area that you found out about the issue. They could have waited for more data. Well, we don't have all the information right now. We're going to wait a little bit longer. This starts to tie into decision drift. And decision drift is one of the largest indicators of lost trust in the workplace. Decision drift is one of the largest indicators of slowed production in the workplace. They could have decided to protect the shareholders' value first, focus on the money. But here's what they actually did. They recalled 31 million bottles nationwide. 31 million bottles nationwide. Not only did they recall the bottles, but they also halted production. In addition to this, they took $100 million plus hit. $100 million. So some of you may be saying, okay, well, Cornelius, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's Johnson Johnson. I mean, they have tons of money. Okay. Make it more relevant to your business and your situation and equate that value for yourself. What would you have done? Right? this takes a level of care, a level of concern, a level of dedication. Because regardless of how you look at it, 100 million is still 100 million. They communicated openly and repeatedly. And this was not a financially comfortable move, right? It was principle-based move. This showed their internal architecture. You see, the company operated with a credo that prioritized customers before shareholders. Under pressure, they didn't invent values. They just revealed the ones that they had. And I want you to catch this, because pressure doesn't create character. It only reveals operational hierarchy. You see, when revenue conflicts with responsibility, which one wins? Revenue, responsibility. You have to be willing. We have to be willing to make tough decisions. We have to be willing to make decisions that seem to be unpopular, as long as they align with the values that we have. And so when I'm talking about standards, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about recreating standards every time a situation arises. What are the baseline standards that we operate from? I was having a conversation the other day, and the concept of standards came up, and what was mentioned to me was, well, Cornelius, that may not be accurate, because what if the standards are too high and people are now struggling to keep up with those standards? Great question. Well, here's how I would answer that. If the standards are too high and there are individuals struggling to maintain those standards, there are a few things at play here. One, which ties into my second point that I often talk about, which is development of our people. A lot of times I see we have this expectation that we'll hire somebody, they come into the company, they should just know this information. But how should they just know the information? Okay, well, we hired you based on the idea that you have some type of degree. We hired you based on the idea that you have some type of previous experience. Okay, but I believe that's just a baseline. When we absorb an individual into our company and we bring them into our culture, we bring them into our circle, we now have an obligation to train them for how we operate. The information and the data and the knowledge that they had prior to coming in is just that. How do we orient that information to be most effective inside of our company? And so, first thing that I always teach is that if we have an individual on the team and that individual is struggling, don't cast them out first. Sit with them, figure out what's going on. Maybe there's something personal in their life that's distracting them. Check to see what their capabilities are. Did we train them? Did we inform them on what was expected? Are they clear on what was expected? Did we agree on what was expected? Are the performing metrics clearly outlined and defined? Was there a level of training that went into place to help them overcome whatever shortage or setback that they're facing in the current moment? And then once we've done that, if we have an individual who is not willing to adapt or unable to adapt, then these standards are just not for you. This is not the place for you to be. And that's okay. Because when we soften standards, what we're doing is we're now affecting the culture, because now we'll have high performers or individuals that are meeting or exceeding the standards, but then we tolerate things that are not at the standard. And so this creates a gap within our system. Now we start to lose our high performing talent because we're not tightening the standards on those who are not holding to the baseline standards. So now we have conflict within our workspace. It's not clear what's accepted. So my thing to this is this: your standards cannot be too high. Your standards are what your standards are. What we must do is train individuals to meet the standard and/or find the ones that are capable of meeting that standard. That's my true belief. You see, in this situation, Tylenol or Johnson Johnson, they didn't rush to defend themselves. They regulated, they paused. They didn't react emotionally to the media scrutiny. They centered on long-term trust rather than short-term damage control. And that is the power. The power is being able to focus on the things that matter most. Who are we? What do we stand on? What do we represent? Because when urgency is high, maybe you don't always have the right answer. But what you do have are your values. You do have things that you stand on. You do have what you represent. And so in this scenario, clarity drove action instead of panic. Now, of course, there was some immediate fallout. There was massive financial loss. I mean, the stock price dropped, public fear peaked, short-term instability was accepted to protect the long-term stability of the company. As we talked about a little bit earlier, their focus was on the customer instead of the shareholder. Tylenol took what they learned from this situation, and then they reintroduced with the tamper-resistant packaging. They pivoted at a moment where things looked to be against them, and they took that data to figure out where they were weak, and they created something to strengthen that weakness. Because of that, their market share eventually recovered. Additionally, the company became a benchmark for crisis leadership, a benchmark. The customer trust increased, and then guess what? They turned this crisis into a structural innovation. Now, here's a leadership lesson that I feel like we can all extract from this for a moment, right? Our values must be decided before pressure hits. They must be. Financial pain is sometimes the cost of moral clarity. Are we willing to stand when it hurts? Teams and markets, they mirror leadership's ability or the instability of the leader. Transparent communication regulates collective anxiety. When we think about what anxiety really is the idea of anticipating a future that hasn't presented itself yet. And this is why it's vitally important to make sure that we pause, regulate, gain clarity on the decisions that we can make, should make, and align those with our value system, right? Our mission and vision statement of what we are as a company, and then take decisive action and move forward with clarity. Short-term protection of image often destroys long-term trust. It's important to realize that it's not always the best method to be reactionary, but to be composed. Now, I want you to reflect on something for a moment. If your organization faced a reputational threat tomorrow, what would you protect first? What would your team protect? What would your team expect you to protect? Are they aligned? If revenue disappeared for 6 months, would your decision still reflect your stated values? You see, the true test of leadership is not performance and comfort. It's coherence under compression. Before we close, consider where pressure is testing your leadership right now. Not the external demands, but your internal response to them. You see, pressure isn't optional, it's constant. But what is optional is how stable you choose to remain inside of it. Pressure is inevitable, but stability is engineered. If this episode sharpened your thinking, share it with the leader responsible for protecting performance under pressure. Until next time, protect decision ownership, your standards, and reinforce development. I'm your host, Cornelius Gamble. This is Pressure and Stability.